Hello everyone. Today I'll be going over how to do the PTC Taster Lab. So the first thing is to have your laptop or device open with the procedure on there so you can follow along. Then you'll want to go to the main table behind me, and in this small bag you'll see lots of these PCR tubes. You'll need to grab 2 of them and go ahead and write your name, and so my name and number 1 on one tube, and then my name and number 2 on the second tube. You'll want to close these so that no dust or particles gets inside. Now, once you have your initials or your names and number written on these, you will bring the first PCR tube to me, where I will go ahead and add 50 microliters of our DNA extraction solution. Now, I've already gone ahead and done that. So here I have my name and number 1 tube with 50 microliters of that solution. What you will do next is you will grab a clean toothpick and you want to gently scrape the inside of your mouth and then swirl that into your DNA extraction solution. So I'll go ahead and take my toothpick, gently scrape the inside and swirl it in there. Okay, really try to get it thoroughly swirled to get all that DNA out. And then you can put the toothpick aside. You can go ahead and seal your tube again, just to make sure you don't spill anything. Now, the next step is to, you want to incubate these test tubes, and we want to heat them up in order to separate our DNA strands. So how do we incubate it? Well, we need to put it into our PCR machine here. Okay, so here's our PCR machine. Now, how this works is, first thing is you see this black screw. You want to unscrew it all the way to the top. Then you want to squeeze these 2 side levers, which will allow you to open the lid. Now, inside you'll see many openings where you can place your tubes. Make sure you know where you've placed your own tube. So go ahead and put your PCR tube, insert it into one of those openings. Then you will close. Again, squeeze the sides, and now it is sealed. Now this black knob, you can then tighten it again, and just tighten it until you feel a little bit of resistance, not too tight. So I feel a little resistance, great, and I'll go ahead and stop it there. What you'll have to do then is, you should have already downloaded the MiniPCR program. So you'll take the USB here, plug it into your laptop, and open up the program. And so here I'll switch over to the computer where I can show you how to set up your PCR device. All right, now that you've connected your MiniPCR to your computer and you've opened up the MiniPCR program, you can check that your device is connected by clicking Device, and you should see that it is connected. Now, you'll then go ahead and turn your MiniPCR machine on. So click the switch on the machine itself. Click on your library, and then hit the plus button here. Now, we are trying to do a heat block, so you can go ahead and label this DNA extraction heat block, and 95 degrees, and you want to set it for 10 minutes. Click Save and Run, and you should see in the Now Running section, your program has been loaded. So it'll take a few minutes to get the lid temperature, but you can watch the lid temperature rising, and the temperature of your sample will also rise. And because what we want to do is we want to run our sample at 95 degrees for 10 minutes. So once your sample reaches 95 degrees, your 10 minutes will then begin. Okay, now your 10 minutes should be up. You should hear an alarm on your laptop indicating that the heating block period is over. So you can go ahead and squeeze the sides to open up your PCR machine, take out your sample, be careful because it's very hot inside, and you can close that up. Now your sample will be very warm at 95 degrees, so we need to cool it down. I'll just rest it on this test tube rack here. Now the next thing we need to do is you need to grab your second PCR tube. Now into this second PCR tube, you need to add 12.5 microliters of your primer mix and of your master mix, these 2 solutions here. How do you measure out 12.5 microliters? Well, you should have a micropipette at your station, and you need to make sure that the setting is set to 12.5. The 5 should be in the blue. You can adjust it using the black knob here. Okay, so the blue letters indicate decimal places. Now, for your micropipette, you need to use these big micropipette tips. You can go ahead and firmly press down to get your micropipette tip on. You will then open up one of the two, so let's say your primer mix here. You'll take out, so you'll put it in here, you will remove. Remember, when you push this down, you only go to the first stop, and then you insert it into the liquid, and then you release the plunger. So I'll go to the first stop, insert, release the plunger, and I go ahead and place that solution into my PCR tube here. Now for this one, I push it down to the first plunger and all the way down to the second stop. I push it all the way down and I remove before releasing the plunger. Now I put this micropipette tip in my PCR primer mix. So I need to eject this first with the small button, right? Then I can grab another micropipette tip, go ahead and open up your master mix this time, the green one, and repeat. Push to the first plunger, insert, release, okay, put this back. Then I'm going to insert and push all the way down, take out, and then release my plunger. Eject the tip. Now, since you are in a group, you guys can use the same tip for the same solutions for everybody to go through. So I would do everyone, the primer mix for everybody, and then the master mix for everybody. So now you should have 12.5 microliters of each of those solutions in here. Now, we want everything to be kind of at the bottom here. So give it a slight shake, and you might notice some air bubbles. So we can get rid of those air bubbles by putting it in a centrifuge here. So I will go ahead and close these up. Take my sample. Now, if you hit the green button, it opens up our centrifuge, and you'll notice these little holders for the mini PCR tubes that they slide in. You need this to be balanced, so do 2 at a time. So one person will put it on this one person on this one, and you will put them on opposite sides of each other, right? Like that. And so once they're on opposite sides of each other, you can go ahead and close it, and then briefly hold on. You only need it on for a second or two. Let it stop spinning, open that up, and remove your samples, okay? So here's my sample. Everything is now at the bottom, nicely mixed. Okay, so we now have 2 PCR tubes, PCR number 2 and PCR number 1 that has my DNA in it. What you need to now do is get your micropipette, and you need to change the setting from 12.5. We want to change it to 3. So it should read 030. Right, so we're going to spin this until it reaches 030. Okay, so now I have it reading 030 there. So what you want to do now is you want to take 3 microliters off the top of your DNA extraction. That's your first PCR tube. And you want to transfer that into your second PCR tube. So I'll go ahead and look at my first PCR tube. I've set this to 3. I grab a micropipette tip, and I'm just going to take the first 3 microliters off the top here. Push to the first stop. Extract, it'll be a tiny amount. And I go ahead and put that into my second PCR tube. Remember to push it in all the way. And eject the tip. This one you need to eject every time because everyone's DNA is different and we don't want to get them mixed up. Okay, and then I close it. Okay, now this PCR test tube number 2 is the one that I care about now because it has my primer and my master mixes mixed in with my DNA sample. So we need to, again, make sure that everything is at the bottom. You may want to do a quick centrifuge with this again. And now we need to run our PCR one more time. So this time, you're gonna run a different program on here, but repeat the same steps in the beginning, where you open up your PCR machine, insert your sample, then gently tighten until it feels secure. And then I'll go ahead and show you how to program your MiniPCR now. Okay, now it's time to set up your PCR machine in order to amplify the DNA samples that we have. So in order to do this, you need to go to your library, click the blue plus button here, and this time you want to hit the PCR button. We're going to go ahead and name this PTC Taster Lab. And you want to set these parameters as I'm about to do now. So make sure yours match what's on my video. Here I'm going to change this to 10 seconds. Annealing will be changed to 58 for 15 seconds. Extension will be extended to 40 seconds. And final extension will be 5 seconds. So this is what your final protocol should look like. You're going to go ahead, hit save and run. So that should now bring you to this here, and you should see it starting to go ahead and run the PCR on your sample. Now this PCR amplification here will go ahead and run for approximately 90 minutes. So you will all have finished class by then. But once your samples are done, I will be refrigerating them, and next class you'll come back to pick up your samples to begin the next stage of our experiment. All right, so it's the next day. Your first step is to grab your test tube that has your name and -2 on it, right? These are the samples that you made the previous day. They've been refrigerated. Now, you need to take 14 microliters of this sample and transfer it to a new empty PCR tube. You want to label your new empty PCR tube with your name, with a dash and an R. The R represents restriction enzyme that we will now be mixing into your DNA. So go ahead and grab your micropipette. Make sure the setting is to 14.0. Grab a new micropipette tip, and you need to take your sample that's been refrigerated, grab 14 microliters out of your sample, and you will transfer that to your new test tube, your new PCR tube. Now make sure that you eject the tip, because everyone has their own DNA and we don't want to get those mixed up. So now I've got 14 microliters of my sample in my new PCR tube. We need to add 1 microliter of our restriction enzyme to this. So this part will be done by me. So bring your PCR tube to me at this point, and I will go ahead and add 1 microliter of this restriction enzyme. Okay, now at this point you want to close the cap tight, and you probably have some liquid stuck to the sides of your PCR tube, so you may want to do a quick centrifuge like we've done in the past. Again, make sure that it is balanced, so you can balance it with someone else's sample on the other side. Just do a quick centrifuge. Take out your sample. And so now that we have our sample mixed with the digestion enzyme, or restriction enzyme, we need to add it to our PCR machine here. So we'll go ahead and, just as we've done before, add it to our PCR machine, loosen this up a bit, cap it, tighten it up. And then we'll now go to our program on our computer and I'll show you how to set that up. You can go ahead and turn your device on. Don't worry about if there's anything running right now. Go ahead and go to the library, hit the plus button, and you want to go to heat block. You want to label this your restriction digest. And we're going to go ahead and set this for 15 minutes. And we want to heat it to 37 degrees. So you'll hit save and run. And if there's any new old protocol, you can just replace it. Hit yes. Now you see the now running tab, and you'll go ahead and see our new 15-minute heating cycle restriction digest start. All right, so as you're waiting for your sample to be heated, you're going to go ahead and do part 3 of the experiment, which is tasting the PTC paper. So first you're going to take a sample that's called the control paper, and this is just so you get the feeling of what paper actually tastes like. Then you're going to go ahead and try the PTC paper. This paper has been coated with the PTC. And so what you want to do is, as you're tasting it, you're going to try to categorize this. Do you taste it at all? Do you taste it mildly? Or do you taste the bitterness very strongly? You're going to record that information in the Google Sheets that's linked on the document. Now, once you've done that and your sample finishes heating up, you'll hear the alarm on your computer. You can go ahead and open up your PCR machine and take out your sample. Now, our next step, part 4 of the experiment, is to run this sample in a gel electrophoresis. So you're going to need this machine here, which is your gel electrophoresis, and the orange cap comes off. Now, inside of this container that's here, you will need to place a gel that I'll provide for you. And this is what the gel looks like. Now, in the gel, once I remove this, at the top of the gel, you'll see various openings, right? We call those wells. And it's inside of those wells that we want to load our samples. Now, the very far left well, we need to save that lane. That lane, we're going to be adding, I will come around and add this, something called a DNA ladder. So this is just segments of DNA that have been cut to known lengths, so we know how it's going to separate. Then you're going to divide the rest of the wells with your group, right? So just make sure you know which well you put in your sample. Okay, so what you need to do then is you need to take your gel here that I'll have provided for you, and you'll need to slide it into your chamber. Now, there's a way to make it fit perfectly, okay? So you need to make sure that the single lines up with the single and the double lines up with the double. Don't force it in. It should gently slide in, and you'll go ahead and place that back in. Now, we need to coat this with a solution that can conduct electricity. So that's why I have this big bottle of TBE buffer. Now, I'll have this bottle at the main table. You can bring a small beaker, fill it to approximately 30 milliliters with this solution. Now, you're not going to use all 30 most likely, but the idea is that your gel sample here needs to be fully submerged with your buffer, right? But just barely submerged, so do it very slowly, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and cover my gel now by gently pouring the buffer. So you might want to look at it from an angle just to make sure that it's all fully covered. That looks good. All right. So now our sample, our gel is ready to be loaded. This part's a bit tricky here. So again, the first lane on the far left, I will come around with the purple ladder to add that to your well. What you will have to do is find the well that you've designated as yours, take your micropipette, you need to set it to 12 microliters, and we're going to be removing 12 microliters of your sample in order to put into the well. Now, once you remove 12 microliters from here, make sure that you really keep your hand steady. I would use 2 hands and insert it at an angle into the well. Now, you don't want to penetrate the gel, right? And also when you are pushing the lever down, make sure you push it nice and slowly to slowly eject your sample. If you push down too quickly, your sample will eject out really fast and it will spill out of the well. The idea is to keep 100% of your sample trapped inside of your well, okay? So you'll go ahead and put it right into that well, slowly release your sample, then take out and release the plunger. And again, make sure that you eject your tip for every new person. Now, once all the samples are loaded, you'll go ahead and put the orange cap back on. And at the very bottom, you should see a power button. You can go ahead and click that on. Now, to make sure that your gel electrophoresis chamber is working properly, you should look for the metal rod that is located at the top of your gel, and make sure that there are some bubbles forming around the metal rod. Those bubbles indicate that there is a current that is successfully flowing through your sample. So now we just need to give it some time for your samples to run down the gel. After we've given it a bit of time, we can analyze our gel. And how do we do that? You should have this black cover. So you're going to go ahead and pop open your black cover. Like this. It should turn into a big rectangle. And this big rectangle fits directly over your sample. And you'll see a light button here. If you click this light button, it illuminates the bottom of your gel. And if you put your phone camera, so the camera is right on this opening, you'll actually be able to see your samples moving. So it might be a good idea that once you start your samples, you could try to take a time lapse of your samples so you could see each sample being separated over time. And you can use that as part of your analysis. And that pretty much brings you to the end of the lab. You can then analyze your gel electrophoresis to see how your bands have separated. Do you have 1 band or do you have 2 bands? Where are they located? And that should let you know whether you are a taster or a non-taster. You can now compare that with how you actually felt whenever you tasted the PTC and see if your results match. All right, good luck.